Good day, Ampetu Washtelo. As an indigenous person, I would greet my relatives, Hao Mitaku Yepe, and then I would also acknowledge the land that we're on and the peoples that were here and are here, and that would be the Lenape Hoking. Lately, colleges and universities and other institutions have taken up this practice in terms of a land acknowledgement. Swarthmore has developed this. As a community of learners at Swarthmore College, we acknowledge that our campus is situated in Lenape-Hoking, also known as the land of the Lenape, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the indigenous people who steward it throughout the generations and who were removed or driven from it by European and American colonizers. We commit to serve as responsible stewards of the land in partnership with indigenous communities, guided by their knowledge and cultures. We recognize the importance of rigorously challenging systems of colonial violence, the college's relationship to those systems, and our shared ongoing responsibility for land and community care. Consistent with Swarthmore's commitment to social responsibility, we seek to build a more inclusive and equitable learning space for present and future generations through deliberate actions and commitment. We also encourage others, as we have attempted to do ourselves, to decolonize through thought and action and other commitments. In this, we have attached to our land acknowledgement a series of recommendations, which include understanding the culture, changing the curriculum of our college, and recognizing the land itself. Thank you. Pidamaya Doksha. Ha mitakuye pi oyasi.
Welcome. I'm Ben Berger, Associate Professor of Political Science at Swarthmore College and Executive Director of the Eugene M. Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility, which is hosting our 7th annual Engaged Scholarship Symposium. I'm so glad you could join us. Ernest Boyer coined the term engaged scholarship to describe teaching and research that connect the rich resources of the university to our most pressing social, civic, and ethical problems. That definition has evolved and expanded over the last 2 decades to include the importance of addressing problems with those affected by them, collaboration and co-creation of knowledge alongside community partners. Many societal and community problems became much more acute during the pandemic. And during that time, our symposium went remote as along with much of higher education. And even after then, a lot of campus life went back to normal. We decided to keep and maintain what we started doing remote because of what it facilitated. It enabled us to have conversation and collaboration and reflection about approaches to knowledge co-creation with other engaged scholarship leaders from a wide variety of higher ed institutions from all over the country. During the past 2 years, we've convened scholars and community partners from, in alphabetical order, Blackfeet Community College, Brown University, Cornell University, Duke University, Miami-Dade College, Penn College of Technology, Penn State University, Portland State University, Tulane University, University of Kansas, and University of San Diego, in addition to contributors from Swarthmore College. It's been an exhilarating learning experience, and I know that'll continue this week as well. I'm proud and humbled this week to welcome engaged scholarship innovators from, in alphabetical order, Drexel University, Gannon University, Hobart and William Smith Colleges, Michigan State University, Mohave Community College, SUNY Buffalo State University, University of Alabama, University of Nebraska, Omaha, and University of Pittsburgh. One thing these diverse institutions have in common is membership in various network organizations, Campus Compact, Partners for Campus Community Engagement, and the Engagement Scholarship Consortium. And that's actually the overarching theme of this year's symposium, the collaborative power of engaged scholarship networks, both regional and national. From Swarthmore's perspective, we benefit tremendously from our membership in these organizations. They magnify all their members' resources and capabilities. I also greatly appreciate the other network organizations of which we're members, including Project Pericles, the Place-Based Justice Initiative, the Philadelphia Higher Education Network for Neighborhood Development, and the Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan Universities. Without further ado, I want to begin session one, titled Equity and Engaged Scholarship, by turning things over to today's moderator, my friend and colleague, Nicole Springer, Director of Institutional Capacity Building at Campus Compact. Take it away, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be with all of you. We are going to get started quickly. I'm going to just talk a little bit about who Campus Compact is and what the Engaged Scholars Initiative is, and then turn it over to our esteemed panelists today, because those are the folks that you came here to hear from. So, as you can see on the screen, today's session is really talking about centering equity as scholar practitioners. Everyone that you're going to hear from today has been involved in the Engaged Scholars Initiative, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Quickly about Campus Compact. So we were founded in 1985, which means we are turning 40 in 2 years, which is really exciting. And we look forward to celebrating all the work that we have done as part of forming a national network with both state and regional affiliates. And now we have a thriving network of member campuses, over 300 across the country. And over the time of these 40 years, we've realized that we really need to start evolving to meet the needs of today. So our field has matured and shifted and gone from, this discussion about service to outreach to engagement and beyond. And we are now looking to the future and getting ideas from our members. So we really have a direct member model, and we're strengthening our capacity as a field leader and movement builder by increasing and work the capacity of others, hence my job title, institutional capacity building, and also just looking forward to being able to continue to spread the word and continue to move forward in this work of community and civic engagement. Our coalition does span the breadth of the country. We have members in 46 states and the District of Columbia. And since Campus Compact has moved to a national model, as Ben mentioned, the COVID pandemic has caused us all to do some shifting. We now have, I think, 15 employees spread out across 11 states, where all those little people are. You can see where we're located. This is a great compact team that I get to work with every single day. We have some movers and shakers and some shifting happening, but I think at this moment, this picture reflects everyone that is working at the compact. And so when we got our new president in, I think 2022, she walked into a staff of about, I would say 8, and we've been able to really grow our work and be able to work with others in a more intentional and direct way. One of the things that I always like to start with and have people understand is that the work at Campus Compact is really grounded in our core values. And these core values were decided upon and created by that wonderful group of folks you saw in the last slide. And so understanding that the work that we do really has to incorporate all of these values, but also the work that we do with each other. And so one of the things that you'll hear about as I talk about the Engaged Scholars Initiative are these 5 things, right? We do want to provide a growth mindset, to be responsive in our offerings and the ways in which things have been developing. We center equity in all of our work. We want to make sure that we are held accountable for our own mistakes while giving each other grace and being able to collaborate openly and have high standards of integrity. And we're also building upon a strong level of transparency. And part of what you'll hear today is that transparency, because we're going to talk about both our joys and our challenges. And sometimes that requires a state of openness. And we appreciate all that our panelists are going to say today. And then finally, we organize our work in a holistic approach. We do these 4 things. What we're really focusing on today and what the Engaged Scholars Initiative really uplifts is supporting individuals in relationship-centered professional development, and by empowering institutions by building the capacity of the folks that are with them. So what is the Engaged Scholars Initiative? It's really an initiative that started a while back, which we'll talk about in the history, but it's designed to develop a diverse group of early career faculty and staff who can strengthen their own critical community engaged scholarship and lead equity-focused change with their institution and communities. The core activities for this program include retreats, online meetings and webinars, participation in conferences, a scholarly project of their choosing, which you'll hear more about, and individualized support through conversations and facilitating coaching and mentoring from others. The organizers recognize the differences of the ESI participants' position type and scholarly priorities. In fact, that's a major hallmark of what we do. We really try to get a diverse group, both in like in race and gender, but also in institution type and in position type. And as a result, the ESI experience utilizes a participant-centered constructivist approach that allows facilitators to adapt to individual and cohort needs and priorities. This is our history. The first one started in 2008. It was a group of 10 wonderful individuals, one of which was Tania Mitchell, so I'm sure many of you heard of her, and a few others that came together and said, we really need to talk about the diversity or lack thereof in the field of higher education, outreach and engagement and community engaged scholarship. And so they came together and had an Engaged Scholars for New Perspectives in Higher Education in 2008. They went on to do really, really great things. Over time, we decided at Campus Compact to do a reboot in 2018. And we did this by region. So each region had a cohort about 15. And we were hoping to continue to do that. But then COVID happened. And so we had our virtual year and we had a cohort in 2021 of about 22 individuals. And now we are embarking on what is our new normal. And since 2022, we've done this national hybrid version where we will meet twice in person. And then over the course of the year, we will meet virtually. Finally, these are our Engaged Scholars this year. We are in partnership with the Lang Center, and we have really enjoyed the work that we have done with them and everything that they have brought to this. We do have applications available now. We're open for the 2023-2024 cohort, which we will be bringing in a new partner and having our opening retreat at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. So that's all the great information about us. And now I think what's more important is that you will get to hear from our great panelists. So if the panelists are ready, I didn't give you an order in which you might want to share your introduction. So I'm just gonna choose who's on my screen, if that works out for you all. Okay, great. So if we could start with Tracey.
Of course. Hello, everyone. I am Tracey Stewart. I'm an ethnomusicologist, and I am an assistant professor of music here at Swarthmore College. Teach courses about Black music in the African diaspora and continental Africa.
Val?
Hi, everyone. My name's Val Ifil, and I'm an assistant professor of dance at Drexel University. Here I teach classes, I do research, and one of the best parts of my job is I have the opportunity to direct our community engaged initiatives within our dance program here.
Thank you. Abigail?
My name is Abigail Jaimes-Gomez. I work at Mohave Community College in Arizona, and I am currently an educational developer at our Center for Teaching and Learning. I am also a former math faculty. Now that in this role, I do a blend of a lot of things. So I do a little bit of faculty professional development. I'm also engaged in a lot of institutional committees really focused on kind of moving forward our organizational development in the field of teaching and learning. So advancing equity through our DI initiatives and our strategic plan, as well as our HSI initiative as a newly designated HSI institution.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Susan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Wallis, and I am the Assistant Director for Faculty Engagement, Strategic Initiatives, and Assessment in the Service Learning Academy at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. So I have the great pleasure of working here on our campus to support faculty in their Engaged scholarship. So that looks like professional development and project-based learning implementation and supports and services to allow faculty the opportunity to help remove barriers to make those engaged opportunities more accessible to faculty and to students.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here and for being willing to share your stories with us and your insights. For those of you who are out there, we have some predetermined questions that we're going to go through. And whilst we're doing that and you hear something or you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat. We will get to it as soon as we can. Additionally, we are going to have time at the end to have some open Q&A, so you can either hold it close to you until that time, or you can drop it in the chat and we'll get there. Great. So the first question I have for you, and I think I'm going to give you an order this time so that no one is shocked or surprised. I think we're going to go Val, Abigail, Tracey, Susan. Because it spells VATS and I needed it to spell something. So Val, Abigail, Tracey, Susan, that way I can remember who it is. So the first question I have for you all is, I mentioned earlier about some of the parts of the Engaged Scholars Initiative. And one of that is we do require participants to work on a scholarly project. If you could each talk briefly about how your project has developed or changed over the course of the program. So sort of what you came in with and what you might be, the ideas that you might be leaving with.
That's such a great question. So I actually have two projects that I want to share because this partnership, this group has been so impactful in all of my community engaged scholarship. But I have a long-term project. It's called Black Girls Steaming Through Dance, and it is a partnership with collaborators, Black women in computing and informatics, dance, urban education, and product design. And it's an after-school program where young Black girls get to learn and end up making choreography and design wearable technology that they then code for like an interactive performance. And so that's one of my projects. And then another one sort of inspired by that is a group of mothers. So I'm focused on mothers the working title is Mama's Move. And that's a project that's mobilizing mothers and with minoritized identities to connect, gather, and kind of share resources and share stories through the mode of dance. And the way this initiative has been impactful for both communities, but I think one of the most impactful ways is like the checks and balance system, right? Because I work within, the institution that has, here at Drexel University, we have our own checks and balance systems and priorities and strategic plans, but I need to like ground myself and make sure that I am in partnership. See, I'm a mover, right? Like I'm a dancer. I want to do a large movement gesture here, right? But I don't want the, power dynamic to be like me coming in from the, from the institution, and kind of reaching out, but instead, how can, this be an equal partnership? And so being intentional about that. Nicole, you don't know this about me. None of you know this, but I actually keep an abacus right next to me. This is something that I learned. Who knew that I would have props? But this was something that was introduced as like a physical way to track like decision making. And so, if the institution like that represents, one group of kind of stakeholders, community partners, I work with youth and I want to make sure they have agency in the project. So that's one way that I make sure that, I'm a liberated gatekeeper, right, in my position here. And yeah, I think that that's a place where I'll start, because I know a lot of other folks need to talk, but there's something about the accountability that I've been able to bring to my projects, especially because I'm working with, underrepresented folks, and I am an underrepresented person in higher education and engaged scholarship. So that feels like a strong value.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And for those who don't know about the abacus, I will try to find a link to the article and put it in the chat. But Abigail?
Thank you. It'll be hard to follow Val, but it's truly a pleasure to be a part of this group, because we get to share this space and just see all the wonderful things that everybody's doing. So kind of where I started on the community engaged project initially, I feel like at our institution, we're a little bit behind when it comes to community engaged in the way that it is, the way that it has evolved to this day. So we, don't really necessarily have a specific center or for community engagement or for service learning. And I know that that has been a priority at our institution, to really focus on kind of how our students are engaging in the workforce and also in our communities. But initially, when I was looking at the project, it was more so kind of equity in the lens of the sphere of teaching and learning, and how our curriculum, needed to be adapted and revised with equity at the center, with an anti-deficit lens, and one that was culturally relevant and responsive to our students. And so that's kind of initially where this project initially was. And I realized that really early on in this cohort that there was this really huge community education piece that was missing. So our partnerships and our intentional collaborations or relationships with our underserved community was missing. And so it has greatly evolved, and I think that has been at the center of the questions and kind of what has taken me back to the drawing board multiple times, really being intentional about the relationships that are built with our community, just kind of in the space and the space demographically or where I'm at. We know that our communities have been, a certain population of our community has been, their voices have been suppressed. And we know that there are a lot of folks who are living, as undocumented families, who live in fear, and have essentially their voice has been suppressed. And so that has been kind of the priority, figuring out how we can amplify those voices. Even when we were looking at community partners, it was difficult to find any networks or connections or like movements that were happening locally that would address that particular community. So it's definitely an area of great need. And so the project has, my personal project has kind of evolved drastically. We realized, again, really early on that our institution has not built this space or network to really kind of foster those relationships intentionally. So connecting faculty with staff and the community and students, and building the space intentionally for them to communicate, to work together, to develop resources and just kind of build capacity essentially. So that's kind of where we are at. Our hopes with this project is to request that space and request that network to be built at our institution to really kind of evolve the way that we do our work. And so working at the Center for Teaching and Learning, I see my role really in the response, my responsibility really in grounding us in everything that we've learned throughout this cohort, whether that's, our building our understanding of the funds of knowledge, our community cultural wealth, and being able to bring a lot of those components and really having that at the foundation of our work. So that's where my aspirations for this next coming year at our institution.
Okay, so 2 hard acts to follow.
Tracey,
right.
you are, oh, there you are.
Oh, did y'all hear what I was saying?
Now we can.
Okay, I was saying 2 hard acts to follow. But so my initial proposal, my initial project was to be in an event that was acting as a fortification in the face of like all of killings, the pandemic, the police violence against Black people. It was to be an event that would go year long. And it would be each year from March through February. And it was going to highlight musical expressions of Black joy, which is wonderful. So each month, the music performance would have been preceded by a scholarly presentation on the history of the selected genre. And so it was a great, everybody agreed with me that it was a great idea. My colleagues did here. But it's one thing to have a great idea and then to have the support to do it immediately in such a short turnaround. And so I was able to do a couple of things toward that end. I had been working before the fall semester on helping to revitalize the gospel choir. So that was a way of doing some of what I wanted to do. I planned and got funding, thanks to the Lang Center, to take my students for one class to DC to the Museum of African American History and Culture so that they could see the history, but also the most important part, we had a tour from the music curator of the museum so that, you know, even in the face of all of these things historically that Black people have had to deal with and presently, they were able to see how music has played such a significant role in that. So even though I wasn't able to accomplish the whole year thing yet, I was able to at least do some small parts of it. But since then, I've, you know, reconfigured, thinking about the idea that to form community, you have to deal with difficult things sometimes. So my way to joy has changed in that I'm looking at a project that incorporates the idea of truth and reconciliation among Black people in continental Africa, as well as throughout the African diaspora, specifically in the United States, because the project that I'm putting together now is called The Afterlives of the Clotilda, which is talking about the slave ship, the last slave ship that went to Alabama after slave trade had been made illegal. And so these people were kidnapped, brought to Alabama, enslaved, and the Clotilda has recently been found. Zora Neale Hurston wrote a book about one of the last surviving members of that group of people that were enslaved. And recently also, there's been a documentary, The Descendant, and the Woman King feature film. And so what I'm putting together, and I've submitted it for a pretty big grant that I have to resubmit, is a mini conference that would incorporate all three of those things. The book Barracoon, which is in the voice of one of those people, the documentary Descendant, and the feature film The Woman King, to invite scholars, community members from Africatown in Alabama, and the film score composers, as well as scholars, to talk about not just the films, but also this very, very heavy burden between African people, continental African people, and Black people in the United States. And this real thing that happened in the enslavement of Black people in the US by African people, and the real need to reconcile that before we can find true joy and true happiness. So it's morphed significantly from what it was, just looking at this idea of joy, but now including how do we get to that space where we can feel true joy and have true happiness. So I'm going to leave it there.
Excellent. So many great things are happening. It's great to hear about all of them. And I don't have to wait now until the middle of May. Susan, you're up.
Thank you so much. So my project initially here at UNO, in the Service Learning Academy, we are really supporting engaged scholarship every single day. And one of the things that initially that I really wanted to address is that what we see is a lot of really great work when our faculty are connecting with community. And then also sometimes we see problematic and harmful things happen in those community engaged teaching and learning and research opportunities. And so what we do here in the Service Learning Academy is really try to think through what is our role, since we're not faculty, right? But we're supporting faculty. And so my initial project was really focused around some of the trainings that we do. So one of the ways that we've really thought about harm reduction and community engagement is these workshops that we started hosting called Addressing and Avoiding Microaggressions in Service Learning and Community Engagement. And so we offer these for faculty, for staff here on our campus, and then we also offer them for our community partners. And so we try to be really intentional about how do we as be good stewards of shepherding these community engaged efforts with our community. And as a metropolitan university, it's a vital part of our mission, right? And how do we reduce harm in these? And so we host these workshops to try and help people think about how their words matter, and how we can help train all of the folks engaged in these project-based and community-based learning opportunities on asset-based engagement. So really helping folks understand that when we go into community that we are collaborative partners and not like saviors, right? So really helping with language and how important that is. And so my original project was focused around these trainings and thinking about how could we utilize feedback from these trainings to think through if they're changing any issues of equity in the classroom. And so we've run into some problems, unfortunately, with our data around that. And so I also have had some shift. We continue to do those workshops and we continue to gather data. But in order to continue with this project, we made a little bit of a shift. And we're also looking at the ways in which these engaged learning, teaching and learning opportunities impact students. And so in the last couple of semesters, we have been sending out surveys to our students that are in service learning classes. So they're doing this community engaged work. And we've been really looking at how do these community engaged learning opportunities affect how they see the community? How does it change their perceptions of communities, especially communities that are marginalized in some significant way? And how do we help them? How do these experiences shape how students engage with community after these experiences? And then how does that change how folks invest in these disinvested spaces too? So that's one kind of facet of it. And then the other piece of our work here in the Service Learning Academy, when we think about community engagement, we also think about how do we do that work of reinvesting in disinvested spaces. So to that end, we have an initiative and a community fellow that works on our team. Her name is Terry Crawford, and she's working on addressing redlining through community engagement and service learning. And so there's also an element of how are we gathering data and then sharing out best practices. So I think what's really morphed and what's been so beneficial to me about this group is like thinking about learning from folks in our cohort and how we learn together and how we share these best practices, and hearing that information has like really shaped the focus of the work that we're doing too. So thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to you, Nicole.
So as you can see, the Scholarly Project is one part of what we do. It's a large part of the work that our different scholarly practitioners are doing. So I'm excited that they got to share that with you. And so as you're talking about your project and as you think about the work that you're doing as a scholar practitioner, so whether you're a faculty member or staff, why or how is equity important in your work? And we'll start with Abigail this time.
So I feel like equity in the lens, I don't know, I think when you experience inequities, it just becomes a deeper part of what you pursue to and crave to provide for others. So I think it's deeply grounded me in the person that I am today. So it's something that I continuously kind of strive to create that space for others. But I'm also really kind of cautious about where it's lacking. So working in higher ed is kind of this weird space where you feel like you're in this contradiction because you know, especially at a community college, that you're working towards a greater public good. But being kind of a minority that's underrepresented at a predominantly white institution, you also see that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So I feel like it follows me everywhere I go. I think about it day in and day out. And it really drives kind of the decisions that I make. And really, I'm looking to kind of the ideas of, I feel like equity is how we empower our communities to lift up the voices that are unheard, to be that advocate, or sometimes, to be the mentor for those who may not have it, at home, or may have had different experiences along the way. So I feel like it's a deep part of the work that I do. And I don't think it's a job that will kind of ever be done, but it's definitely a goal that I continue to strive towards in the communities that I enter, in the spaces that I enter. This group has been, again, really just a great part of helping me even enhance that understanding. I didn't even realize that there were some ideas that I had, preset without knowing, and how I sometimes talked about myself and perhaps our community through a lens of what we were lacking and not really looking at the systemic issues that really drove that there. So I feel like it's this continuous opportunity for ongoing learning and self-reflection. So that's kind of how I see it fitting into the work and who I am as a person.
Thank you for sharing that, Abigail. Tracey?
Yeah, so the why of it is because the multiple absences all around me as a student and now as a professor make me painfully aware that we don't live or work in a world that's dominated by altruistic actors. And it's my job to ensure that my students learn about music making communities, knowledge systems that are too often disregarded outright because of who they belong to. And the how of it, well, it's also my personal and professional responsibility to teach my students, by example, the importance of showing care in the ways in which we interact with communities that we claim to value. In the case of my project, I feel bound, if not by blood, then by spirit, to the Africatown community, who are the descendants of the Clotilde survivors. I really hope to work with any who are willing to provide them with a platform for talking about their community's history and its needs and aspirations as a part of the program that I'm planning.
Great. Thank you, Tracey. Susan.
So I think for me as a practitioner too, I think about equity in all of our interactions, and I have this sort of unique role too in this balance because we support these engaged scholarship opportunities for faculty and community partners, but they're often not ours, right? And so how do we address kind of that power dynamic when we see those things happening between students and faculty in a way that is solution focused, right? And calls people in to these conversations that are really important about equity. And so I think some of those things I mentioned before that some of the ways that we try to manage that is through, or to address that really important equity work is through these microaggressions training and utilizing an asset-based lens. And then I think it's one of the primary roles that I do here in our department at UNO is really connecting faculty with partners in the community. And a lot of times what happens is we have faculty that come to us and they say, oh, I want to do this thing. Can you help me find a partner that will do this thing? And instead, like taking a step back and saying to faculty, we really try to utilize what our community needs. So how can we go into the community with what our learning objectives are and address needs in the community, right? Utilizing that asset-based lens. What are the strengths in that community and how can we be co-collaborators and support that really good work? And I think that's kind of what equity looks like for us, is that like harm reduction piece, and then utilizing asset-based community engagement and also this needs-based, so that we're not going to the community and asking for more things from them, but going into community as co-collaborators. I think those are some of the primary functions or the ways in my role that I try to address equity. And I'll turn it over to you, Val.
Yeah, it's so nice to like listen to everybody and how how you think about this. You know, especially like Abigail, I was really drawn to like how you were talking about, like, this is something that's lived, you know, and I can relate to that. That feels similar. And so I think about equity throughout the day, almost every day. It's visible, right? It's something that we can see. We can see inequities. I work at a private, predominantly white institution in West Philadelphia in a predominantly or majority Black neighborhood. And I am like the steward of students, kind of connecting with neighbors, and you know, and I often, do call myself or think of myself as a liberated gatekeeper, but just acknowledging my role within the institution. And in that, especially in my community engaged work, I really think about, you know, what is my role? What is my role to shape policy, to, you know, shift understanding and make more spaces and support, you know, support my students, support my colleagues, and be in an ongoing practice of thinking about equity. And for me, the way that shows up in all of my research is creating intentional counter spaces, right? So it's not, we are all equal, right? Like, or sometimes like, this is a safe space. Like, just because we say it doesn't mean that it is, right? You have to create it. And that takes as much intention as it took for our systems to be so inequitable. And so when I'm thinking about equity, I think about spaces, right? Like by trade, by practice, I am a choreographer, right? And so I look at, you know, there's a blank space in front of me, and I need to make intentional choices as carefully as I would craft a choreography. How many people who are in here, what kind of shapes, what kind of mood, you know, all of those things. I bring that into my work as an engaged scholar, and, you know, same thing. And that's why I'm intentional with language. I think that was Susan who was saying that, being really intentional with language. And so my one research project that I was talking about is Black girls steaming through dance. And that's one way, you know, with me, with my Drexel title of me, you know, kind of building a bridge and saying, no, this is for you. Like, this is for us. So welcome, right? Because there's a tension between the neighborhood and the institution, right? There's a history. And so how can I be intentional through the work that I do to say, you know, that, this space is ours to co-create together. And that's one of my like ongoing practices of, you know, supporting equity in my work.
Thank you. I appreciate you all just giving us an idea about how and why and what equity is for you, and the work that you do and in your personal lives. And you all sort of touched on a bit of this interesting position that we are in higher education, working in spaces that were not created to be equitable, and having to function within them. And so what are some challenges that you've encountered as you try to engage equity at your institution? So this time we'll start with Tracey.
All right. Well, it's been really, really challenging to teach the courses that I've wanted to teach and that I've been determined to teach, and to plan programming that deal with histories of Blackness in continental Africa and throughout the African diaspora, because they're not just based on historical events, things that have happened, but they're on things that are very present and happening right now in our world every day around us, and will be happening for the foreseeable future because of the way that the political and social landscape is laid out for us. So part of the challenge is not just teaching that, but teaching those courses in this space, teaching those courses with needing to be mindful that, you know, I'm dealing with students from all over. I'm dealing with students that are thinking about what a large part of our society has shown us they don't want to think about, with this pushback against history and, you know, actual history, this revisionist history that they're shoving down or trying to shove down our nation's children's throats, because they're difficult things to think about. They're uncomfortable things to contemplate. And so talking about enslavement, rebellion, retribution, reparation, retaliation, and various forms of survival is so unpleasant for this growing swath of our nation. And that's precisely why I feel an obligation to power through the discomfort to ensure that at the very least my students know about it. You know, they don't leave my classes without knowing the uncomfortable truth. You know, we can talk about enslavement all day, but we also have to talk about the Clotilda and how Black people quite often ended up coming here. And it's a conversation I had an interaction with a couple of my students this semester, because my class is pretty much, you know, split down racially, split in half. And so it's one of those things that quite often, you know, we don't want to talk about that. We need to keep that in the family. But no, those are those things that kill. Secrets kill. Secrets get in the way of true happiness, and secrets get in the way of me hearing sincerely that call to come back through the door of no return. Come back to the door. You know, it's just, we need to have a conversation, a couple of conversations before that can happen, before it can happen and it be genuine. And so as for my institution, I think that like most, there are always politics at play that inhibit the ability of the altruists among us to do all of the good that we want to see happen. And like most, it's the job of each of us not to accept things such as on their face and alone, such as land acknowledgements and lofty statements and decrees, as any more than initiating gestures toward meaningful, substantive, and transformative commitments that must follow, and all too often don't. So those are the challenges that I faced in my personal and professional life, and ones that I will happily continue to try to surmount.
Tracey, thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's an important reminder too about sort of the context in which we're in today, right now at this moment. Thank you. When I think about some of the challenges, I think I've addressed some of those, like in supporting these engagement opportunities. I think we see some of these problems happen, yeah, like in real time. But I think another thing about a challenge is the ways in which in our institution, and I assume in kind of most institutions, there's just like this volume of work, right? And when I think about sort of like through the lens of like white supremacy culture, how am I upholding that, like this quantity versus quality mentality, and kind of trying to take a step back and think more intentionally about the depth of the relationships. I think that's really hard. It's really hard because there continues to be these expectations and this volume of work that has to get done too. And so how do we, I don't know, I think that's probably the biggest challenge that I face every day, is like, how do we get it done? And then how do we challenge that white supremacy culture of this massive volume? And I think the other challenge kind of institutionally is, it is maybe more specific in my role, is like the balance of nurturing relationships and calling out or calling in problematic things. Especially when faculty or community partners kind of have their own partnerships going, what is my role? And we have a team of graduate assistants that work here too. So how do we support and manage kind of the power dynamic that ends up happening inevitably when graduate students are supporting these engaged scholarship endeavors for our faculty, and managing the relationships and the work and the power dynamics between all three. So yeah, I'd say those are maybe some of my challenges, and I'll turn it over to you, Val.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm sure, like, I'm taking notes here, and I'm sure that you all probably have a good sense of like the great conversations that we all have as a community. And I just want to echo what a lot of folks here are saying. One is the time and space for authentic relationship building, especially because of the town gown, tension between a lot of institutions in the communities where they reside. It takes time and trust, and oftentimes the university, we're on the quarter system, and we describe it like getting shot out of a bullet at the beginning of the quarter, or the beginning of the year. It's like, and so where do you have time to nurture relationships, or, the tenure and promotion, kind of world, right? So the idea, we want more engaged scholars and people who are thoughtful about this at institutions, and, but the policies and the systems to actually be in the institution sort of run counter to the core values of engaged work. And so how do we continue to shift policy around relationships, and the quality over quantity, and all of these things that we're discussing here. So I think a challenge is definitely the policy, or policies throughout. And I think another piece for me is, which again feels like an ongoing practice, is the communication and meeting people where they are, and listening, because I just feel like, as an engaged scholar, you have so many different stakeholders, right? The communities that you care very much about, and amplifying their voice, making sure that they have ownership in the research project, also your academic units, and, the institutions where you're working and they're supporting, and, providing the resources to make this happen. You also care about contributing to your field, right? And making sure, Susan, to borrow from you again, we want to minimize or reduce as much harm as possible. And so when we're sharing out our practices, so I feel like there are a lot of different people to communicate with. And so how do you make sure that you show up authentically with each one of these stakeholders, and let things happen in the timeline that they happen, while also really, really advocating for the value of the work and doing the work well within your institution. So I feel like that communication thing, it feels like a dance to me all the time. You know what I mean? And I think along with that, there's, that whole kind of rupture repair concept, right? Because it will happen. We can't be perfect. We can't expect anybody else to be perfect if we're building authentic relationships, and if we're grappling with things that aren't easy, like inequities, right? And we're working towards, a more equitable space. And so we're going to make mistakes, but having grace and having those tough conversations, the rupture and repair is, I wouldn't even say that that's the challenge. I feel like that's sort of the, maybe the solution. I don't know, or just leaning into that, being more comfortable with that. But it's hard work. It's hard work, y'all. And something worth doing.
Abigail?
Sorry. Yeah, to really echo and go parallel with the statements that everybody has said thus far. I feel like time is sometimes our worst enemy, and I can relate to, the critical component of, being able to develop and foster those relationships. I think when we connect with our communities, we sometimes realize we feel this deep bond to them too, but our institutions are set up in certain academic terms, and we have certain plans and certain goals that we want to accomplish within a certain time frame, and has to fit within the class structure. But we know that sometimes that doesn't necessarily meet or always meet the community's needs or the priorities kind of at hand. So I can definitely relate to what our group has been talking about already so far. I think in this space that I'm in the region that we're in the Mohave County is located in the northwestern part of Arizona, and it's the 5th largest county in the U.S., but it's one of the counties with the highest levels of poverty. And so we know that there is a huge need in our community, and the political landscape, much like all across the nation, has been a really kind of troublesome issue that we've have had to constantly navigate. At our institution, I feel we have deeply felt that need to kind of tread on thin water, just because we have, you know, some of our students, some of our community members, and even some of our governing board members that will be vocal about being against some of these efforts, and how they are inequities that are perpetuated to other groups because we're focusing on, you know, advancing issues with our communities, you know, as an HSI, you know, advancing the Hispanic or Latinx community. They see it again as a kind of win-lose situation. So it's been an area where we have to navigate the political landscape from the state level, but also kind of to our governing level, in our county region. And we see that in our communities too. So it's not always a safe space for our students to go out into certain parts of our communities. So I think that is also something that we have to be very cautious and mindful of, and realize that, you know, even in certain areas, we may not want to send our students there. The other part that really kind of is a critical issue that's kind of been at the forefront of what's been on my mind, and it's again a part of a national issue, but you know, post-pandemic, the enrollment decline severely was centered around community colleges, and we know that historically that's where a lot of our students who are underrepresented and who are minority students of colors, that's where they historically attend. So I think the enrollment decline in that population is like a critical issue. That is something that as community colleges, we have to really pay attention to and quickly, to understand why are we losing some of these students? What can we do to adapt and change to ensure that they can still have access and have equitable opportunities to advance and to have opportunities, you know, to earn a certificate, to earn a degree, to go on to a transfer pathway. I think our role is really critical now. I know as an institution, our priorities are numbers, get them in and out, but really it goes beyond that issue. It's really understanding who we serve, and again, knowing the historical representation of who we're losing. I don't think we can afford to lose those students. So we have to adapt and enact and create innovative solutions to make sure that we create a more equitable and accessible opportunity for all learners.
Right. Thank you all for engaging us in a conversation about challenges. I'm going to go off script for a minute. Good, you all nodded, like not a problem. We have a really great question from the audience, and so I want to make sure that we discuss this a little bit. So, which is great because you all sort of brought up, and so this, I'll read the question and sort of add some things. So this person said, I appreciate what Valerie said about the importance of acknowledging and addressing tensions with the surrounding community. And I think there was a time since this question was posed, right, that you've all sort of talked about what it means to work with your surrounding community or with the community in your partnership. So to Valerie or any other panelist who wants to answer, how do you gauge whether your efforts are having any uptake or effect?
I'd be happy to start, but I'm sure that, yeah. I've been in a position, like I just like to hear folks, like building relationships, and like that is number one. Like when I moved into this job and I knew that community engaged work would be like a big part of my job, I moved into the community where I was going to be working, right? Like, you know, I'm walking my dog and I see the, you know, the kiddos walking to school, like that, it's important for me, like building relationships. And I realize that not everybody's circumstances will allow that. Mine happened to at that time. But and then I find that folks are just honest, right? I also have like more formal things like surveys, I always like to ask, just kind of gauge from everywhere I can. But I feel like for me, the relationship piece and trust building really allows people to be real, especially if it's not written down, I think. But that lets me know, how I should shift and pivot. And I was talking about the accountability piece and the abacus, but one thing that I did in response to this initiative was I'm working with I was able to get more funding. So we're able to hire on some folks who have been participants in our programs to be on leadership team. So now we're like really working in partnership, and folks are getting like paid. There's like money kind of backing that, the wisdom that they have to offer. But I think that, yeah, partnerships and relationship building for me really allows that sense of transparency. And now I think folks are like, oh, like, if somebody says no, you know what I mean? Oh, that, or that can be like perceived in a certain way, then I certainly trust that and listen to that, and then support our academic unit in shifting. But I'm curious to hear what others have to say.
I think, Val, I really appreciated your feedback there too. And it made me think about, so for us, we have this initiative addressing redlining through community engagement and service learning. And the start of that initiative was really community discussions. And so I think part of that for our team was like, and not on our campus. So like going into community and hearing what are your perceptions of our university and how do we connect folks better to our university in these sort of reciprocal ways, right? And so I think how we've been engaging anecdotally is like the engagement in this community board that started in these community conversations. And so bringing folks from the community to this board that then is advising, what does this addressing redlining work look like on our campus, so that they're leading that work. And then compensating, one of the things I heard you say too, Val, is, and kind of echoing this, is paying folks for their time, right? So if we're going into communities and we're saying, hey, we're interested in a partnership, how do we ensure that we're investing in folks and paying them for their time? And so for folks that are on our community board, the Addressing Redlining and Community Engagement Board, they are compensated for every board meeting. There's meals provided, there's compensation for transportation, and they're held in the community. So when we think about UNO, we really think about Omaha as a community. And so how can we take those opportunities out into the community? That's what I would contribute to that too.
Tracey or Abigail, did you have anything you wanted to share about the question from the audience regarding engaging the community?
Well, Abigail, you want to go? Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt Tracey. Okay, sorry. The audio cuts off just a little bit in the beginning. We are early on in our kind of initiation of this, and I think through this cohort and this group, the book that Nicole has assigned us has been really just pivotal in our understanding really about how valuable reflective practice can be, not just for our own work, as scholars, as practitioners, but also in our students in our communities. And I know we often talk about journaling and reflective practice, and I think the way that the concept of the book really addressed it, just it was so empowering to see how important it is to have that as a component of the work that we do. So, I know we do assessments, we do surveys, and we have informal, conversations with people, but even just opportunities to reflect on what went well and what didn't, and to have those opportunities, even just to have a moment to again, just take the time to reflect. That is something that I hope that we can kind of build at the root of the work that we're doing as we are ongoing in in our efforts. But I know we are a little bit early on in our formal structures, so a little bit limited in the recommendations there.
Yeah, same. I'm, like I said, I switched, projects. I'm just starting to put together this idea that includes the African town community. And the one thing that I'm trying to keep forefront in my mind is that this is not, even though, as I said, if not by blood, I'm bound by spirit, because that experience of the person that's in Kosala, who Zora Neale Hurston spoke with, it's very personal to me, because this is an actual person whose stories, whose words we're hearing, not, in the form of a slave narrative, not in the form of a story somebody told me about, like my great-great-grandmother, but the actual words of this person. So it's very, very personal to me, but I need to keep at the forefront in my approach of the Africa Town community that it's not my story, no matter how much I might connect to it. And I need to allow them to tell me if and how I can help, if and what I can do or bring to them. And so though that's not happened yet, I can't tell you if it, had a positive effect or a negative effect, if there was any change or shift in outcome. But I know hopefully that my approach to this will ensure more of a positive outcome. I'll let you know how it goes.
And we'll look forward to that. So I'm going to continue to go. We're getting some great questions in the Q&A, and so I'm going to ask the next one because I think it's really important. But before I continue, I just want folks to know, like, the Engaged Scholars Initiative, while we do a lot of content, there was a whole lot of content in the beginning. These are the conversations and these are the things that we really want people to engage with, is these hard questions, because the folks in the Engaged Scholars Initiative are all early in their careers. And so it's a great time to have these chats. These are not conversations I had early in my career. I'm 20 years in at this point, and I'm so excited to be able to be a part of a group like this, to hear these great conversations that you all are having. And so this next question, buckle up, be prepared. So this attendee says, you've all made very moving comments on the magnitude of the injustice and exclusion that we're dealing with. It's not just fixing this or that small local nuisance, but more about dealing with huge centuries-old dynamics. It's a lot that we're talking about here. With US politics being so polarized, do you ever get pushback from students or alumni or other factions that don't like these problems and dynamics to be aired, acknowledged, and addressed? So really a pointed question about, going back to your challenges.
Can I speak first? So to that answer, I think I mentioned it, the pushback that I got from some of my Black students who were not happy with the fact that I was talking about the complicity of continental African people in the enslavement of Black people. And I mean, that's valid. It's painful. You've got all these kind of things going on. It's painful, it's betrayal. It's, so you betrayed me, but you want me to come back home. And so there are all these things going, but I tried to have like really open conversations with them. And they understand it. They know that this happened. It's just the idea of like airing it for use by white people to excuse their participation. And of course, their major participation in the slave trade. And so the fear was that the anxiety was about that taking away, that historical fact, taking away from the horror of US chattel slavery. And so just, the need to figure out ways to diffuse that, to like ahead of time proactively say, well, how would I respond if, a person came up to me and said, well, white people, your own people sold, how am I going to respond to that? How can I do it in a way that's impactful? How can I help my students respond to that? And as for like the present day politics, I foresee honestly getting at some point pushed back because of the courses I teach, the course that I'm teaching now, from Roots to Django, interpreting the soundtrack of Black pain, Black power, Black joy, and retribution. You know, for some people, those are fighting words. What are you talking about, retribution? But I mean, reality is reality. All people, many Black people didn't peacefully just say, okay, yes, boss. There were killings. This is fact. And that's not murder. It would be today, but these things happen. So I think just being willing when that happens to have open conversations, to stand your ground, for lack of a better phrase, and, you know, just have open dialogue firmly.
Yeah, to jump on to like what and add on to what Tracey was saying, I feel like at our going back to our institution, I was not born, but I was pretty much raised in the communities that I serve. And so as an alum of MCC, I feel like deeply connected to the community, and it was the community that I grew up in. And I know that there are plenty of challenges, and that I don't believe that it's going to go away. But, you know, part of the work that I have learned kind of personally in my role in the institution is kind of where my position places me in the institution. I think this is an opportunity to be very strategic about the spaces that we are occupying and the seats that we're filling. I think when we think about our institution, sometimes it takes not convincing, but it takes a group of people that have a shared vision and shared goal to really move these initiatives forward. And it's sometimes not change that can happen overnight. And there will be definitely resistance from students, from communities, from colleagues, you know, from all across the board. But I think what I've learned along the way is that voices have been intentionally silenced, and kind of understanding that taking up that space, it feels like an active resistance in itself. And it feels like you're able to take part of what was taken from you. So I feel like this is an opportunity to be strategic about, you know, the committees that we're involved with, the groups that we are involved in, to be more involved kind of in different spaces around the institution, and essentially understand kind of where our networks are at. This is kind of where we've been talking about the ESI group, you know, the community engaged field of work. There are many networks and communities within higher ed. And I think, you know, with the pandemic and everybody shifting so drastically to a remote environment, it created this virtual opportunity and space for us to connect with others who are working towards a common goal. So it's become a lot easier to connect with like-minded individuals who are striving to the same end goal. And so it's, you know, where we once felt isolated, and that's kind of the place where I was in, we're fortunate to kind of be able to be a part of other networks that help us tread through these issues and understand, okay, how are you navigating it? You know, what would you recommend? Are you seeing these issues? So they're not isolated just to our institution or our communities, but we can kind of understand the whole scope and learn from others really how to navigate these kind of uncharted boundaries that we're trying to still explore in our spaces.
And I have a couple of thoughts or examples, I guess, of this. I love this question. Whoever said this is a great question. It's so hard because it's hard, like it feels hard. Like I feel like this is one of those questions that like makes you feel, because it's so layered. There are so many like decades of kind of trauma and harm. And then this moment is really exposed, like, meaning like our political climate. And so I live and work in a space, like it's in Pennsylvania, it's in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And the president of our university is both like unapologetic about we are an anti-racist, like, you know what I mean? Like comfortable making those statements, and also kind of stating we want to be one of the most civically engaged universities, So as far as this holding value, like I feel like I have some freedoms in that, right? In the kind of in my house, right? That being said, it's hard, right? Like in the classroom space, being somebody who kind of facilitates like the next generation of community engaged folks, the future scholars, right, in my classroom. And oftentimes I'm like the only person of color in the space, right? And we're talking about some of these things and how do I make it a safe space for people to talk, and all of that. And then how do I not hold things on my body? You know what I mean? Like, how do I let it go? Because sometimes like when you're, when you're having some of these conversations about, slavery wasn't okay with everybody, like enslaved people, it was not okay. You know what I mean? But like, I feel like sometimes there are some like conversations that, especially with the way that we're taught history, it's confusing, right? And then you get to these moments and then race is coming up and it's like, oh, wait, yeah, this is a new frame of reference, right? And so how do I occupy those spaces and, as a Black woman in predominantly white spaces and like have those conversations and meet that pushback in a way that doesn't like that it's not personal when it feels personal, right? Like, or if it feels like it's about your body, So I think that's something that's real, right? And I think even within my institution, which is, openly, kind of in support of equitable spaces and everything, there still is a little bit of that, the tension of, if we open up the space to these folks, then we're closing space to other folks. And like navigating that and advocating for, caucus spaces and, advocating for the fact that, for groups of people who have been historically shut out of higher education institutions, like how do we open it up? What language can we use? And, what actions are we taking to, but there is that pushback and then kind of finding like the magic, to like sprinkle onto the conversation to soften everybody, in these really difficult conversations. I feel like that's also part of our work. But it's hard, like, yeah, I feel like I keep on ending everything I'm saying with like, it's hard, but it is. And this question is a hard one and a good one. Yeah.
Just want to make sure everyone had a chance to speak that wanted to speak. Yes. Okay. One more question from the audience, and then we're gonna. I'm just gonna sort of set this up for you all. We're gonna do one more question from the audience, and then we're gonna end on our question on. Excuse me. Some key takeaways from the ESI program that you've been able to use at your home institution. So it's 1:20. We have about 8 minutes to get through question from audience and key takeaways. Are we up for the challenge? Yes, awesome. So this question comes from Heather Novak. Do you see a connection with community reciprocity and policy and advocacy? So a connection with community reciprocity and policy and advocacy. Why or why not? This might be connected to when you were talking about paying, compensating your community partners. It might be connected to that, or however else you want to connect it. So the connection with community reciprocity and policy and advocacy. Why or why not?
I'd be happy to start on this one. Yeah, I do see a connection. I think kind of in that lens of paying people for their time. Absolutely. I think that is a kind of a best practice too in general when we're thinking about community engagement just in general, and how folks, the fact that we exist in a capitalistic society and not assuming that everyone has the capacity to volunteer their time, right? And I think when we are able to compensate people, then we're ensuring that more people are at the table. So I think yes. As far as the other thing that comes up for me when I think about community reciprocity and that as a best practice is how it informs our students' own identities as civically engaged folks, right? Like if they are seeing this reciprocity happen in these engaged learning opportunities, then they're seeing themselves as a contributing member in their own community, right? So I think that that's a way that it informs policy and advocacy, is because the students are then seeing themselves as change makers. And we've been gathering data for a long time that shows that that's the case, that when students engage with community in these meaningful ways, that they more identify with the community and that it changes their perception of their own community and other communities too. So yeah, I think so.
I want to just thinking about the idea of reciprocity, and not in relation to this current work, but hopefully I'll be doing work like this, like my field research here, with other communities. But I remember one of the people in one of the communities in Jamaica was complaining, I think rightly so, that people were constantly coming to them and wanting to ask questions about them and go on to write these papers and articles and do talks. Well, why can't we write about ourselves? Why can't we get invited to do a talk? Not at a conference that's held in Jamaica by them, but here. And so I think that in addition to, financial reciprocity, that we need to think more broadly about reciprocity in different forms, intellectual exchange, credit, all of these things that I think we quite often take for granted. We don't think about it because initially reciprocity, I think of money. I'm asking them questions, I'm asking for help, we're going to pay them for that, but it doesn't end there. So, and I think that part of the problem is, not so much advocacy, but, what are the rules surrounding that? What are the rules surrounding these things? And how can we advocate to change those rules? So yeah.
I'm happy to go next. I feel myself like nodding. I'm like, yes, Tracey. So I feel like that's probably a natural flow. So as far as the connection, like, yes, there should be. I feel like that's like a definite. And are we there? No. Like that also feels clear. And like, are we being more intentional to be on a path? Yes, that also feels like a yes. In a couple of ways that this may happen for me, like in my mind's eye right now, is like money, right? Power, relationships, you know what I mean? And then also like ownership. And one example of this, especially our position as scholars, we're generating all of this knowledge and information, right? But if you're on the tenure track like I am, there's all of this, you have to be the first author, you get more, it's like, it looks better if you are the sole author. And, so our systems aren't really set up for us to have shared ownership, for us to, have, like Nadine Cruz talks about, like multiple forms of knowledge. And we value academic knowledge above all else, and within academic institutions. So I think that we have a lot more shaking up to do, but at least, we're at a point where maybe we're recognizing that, that this is important. This relationship, this connection is important, and we have work to do.
Okay, Abigail, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Can you do it in like 35 seconds?
Yes. So
Yeah, okay.
for the first question, the Q&A, I think I hope that with the communications and the reciprocal relationships built with community. That's where you learn more of the gaps and what's kind of hurting and harming our communities. And as an institution, we have power within the relationships and the networks, and acknowledging that we should also acknowledge the responsibility to advocate for those communities. So definitely yes. And then takeaways from ESI, I feel like if anybody gets the chance to participate, I would highly encourage it. It's built it's been a transformational experience that has helped me as a personal, professional, individual level, understanding leadership, understanding community. And if everybody could get a little piece of the Campus Compact ESI group, I think our world would be 10 times better and amazing. So
Thank you, Abigail. And thank you for leading us into the key takeaway. So I don't remember what the order was. So Tracey, Susan, Val, and then we'll close. One key takeaway from ESI over this past year.
All right, so the idea that engagement is so much more than just that word like sounds like it is. So I can't do one. And also the importance of being introspective and knowing yourself, knowing your biases, knowing the assumptions that you might make about yourself or about the people that you're interacting with.
So I would say it's hard to pick just one takeaway, because I think, as you can see from this group, there's so much that we learn from each other. And but I think maybe for me, maybe the biggest takeaway is the intentionality, right? That it's this carved out time and space to say, what is it that we're doing? How are we doing it? Why are we doing it? And how can we do it better? I think the intentionality that the ESI group has brought into my professional life has been really, really valuable for me.
And Val.
Sorry. I think that accountability, are there ways that you can measure, who has a voice and who doesn't, and, having a kind of a practical way to measure your partnership.
So I wish I could have you all give our panelists a round of applause. This has been incredible and amazing. Thank you everyone for joining. Remember that tomorrow is day 2 of the symposium. It's going to start at the same time. Log back in, hear from more great people, and thank you for your time.